Andrew Weissmann, I ask you this question. The definition of cooperation would presumably have allowed this whole thing to be worked out over the course of these months that Betsy is talking about. We're going to look at the timeline in a second, but I mean, in your experience, when people go to get warrants of this kind from a judge, is it not the case in general that no judge wants to give a warrant if there's some other way for it to be worked out through a cooperative negotiation with the parties? This seems like the judge here, especially in the case of a former president, would have needed to be convinced that the time for talk was over. No?
Yes and no. First, the judge would not get involved in that decision, the one about whether this could get worked out or not. The judge's sole role is for him or her to decide whether there's probable cause of a crime and probable cause that the evidence of that crime would be in the location. But there's no question that what you're saying is true with respect to the Department of Justice, because normally the way that you get information is either through a voluntary request or through a subpoena. And when you proceed by search warrant, what you're really saying is, I don't trust the person who I could subpoena to actually comply with that subpoena. And I think the missing piece for all of this is that Merrick Garland had to have asked the question, why do we need to proceed by search warrant and not by subpoena? And there had to have been a pretty compelling answer that they thought that the former president would not comply with the subpoena. And I think that's the piece that we're missing, is that evidence that led them to think that there would be essentially a form of obstruction of justice unless they went in by search warrant.
Andrew, this is a very serious time for our country, but I just need to know whether that was a dog or a goat that just walked behind you on camera.
Yeah, so that's my English Cocker Spaniel, who has a habit of coming on air just as the cameras roll.
I would just say that he or she is always welcome here. I just want to make sure it wasn't a goat. That would be a different question. Jonathan Lemire, I want to throw up the timeline I mentioned a second ago. Here's the kind of the what we know about Trump's handling of the classified information. You got in mid-January of 2022. The National Archives retrieves 15 boxes of documents from Mar-A-Lago. We'll remember the stories about all of this. In February, the Archives asks the DOJ to investigate. In early May, the DOJ subpoenas the National Archives for classified material. In the spring, around that same time, agents visit Mar-A-Lago. We know that now from the New York Times. Trump is present at that meeting. And now we have the FBI doing this search of Mar-a-Lago. From the perspective of someone who knows Trump world really well and has reported on them throughout all of this, did you have any sense from any of your sources anywhere in the former president's orbit that this was a thing that people were bracing for? Was there? I mean, that's a very leaky place. People generally talk about a lot of stuff. Stuff doesn't stay secret for very long. It's surprising to me that Trump kind of apparently saw this coming, or at least thought that he was still very much entangled in this investigation, and that we read nothing about it during the last couple of months.
Well, first of all, John, no wildlife here, no goats at all. But there were people in Trump orbit that I have spoken to. They knew, of course, there were some degrees of contact here. The agents had visited a few months prior. They were surprised that it came to this step. They thought that they'd be able to resolve this through normal course of negotiation. They did think they were being cooperative. They didn't anticipate the agents to suddenly show up in Palm Beach yesterday, talking to Secret Service allowing them on the property. Of course, we should note the former president was not there. He was in New York City yesterday. But this is something that they have been concerned about. Of course, there's a whole slew of legal issues swirling around the former president right now. It can be in New York, it can be in Georgia, it can be in D.C., and now this. And of course, the January 6th committee's work continues apace, the Department of Justice working there as well. Now, obviously, this is Donald Trump, so politics come quickly at hand. And he has been hinting at for a while that he suggested he might be a martyr, a victim of the deep state. If there's one truism to the Trump presidency, is that every day was fueled by grievance and a sense of victimhood. And that's happening again with the statement last night from what we're hearing, the echoes from his allies, Republicans in Washington and around the country yesterday and again today, suggesting that he was being unfairly signaled out, that he was a victim of a conspiracy, and that this was a politically motivated search. Now, the White House has made clear, I broke the news last night, that they got no heads up whatsoever about this raid. White House Press Secretary Karine Jean-Pierre just now, moments ago, in the briefing room, reiterated that as well, saying even the president himself found out about it from watching television. So they are saying they're keeping their distance from this, but certainly former President Trump and his team are going to try to play the victim card as much as they can going forward to swirl up the hornet's nest.
Asha, I want to ask you, about a tweet that Andrew Weissmann sent last night, where he noted that Trump apparently made the decision that it was in his interest to publicize this investigation. The DOJ sort of played it by the book and were keeping it quiet. What do you think it is? What would you say? I know this will be speculative, but what do you think it would have led Trump to determine that it was in his interest to try to publicize that this had happened and do it the way he did?
Well, Don, Trump is an information warrior. I mean, he's very savvy with information warfare, and he understands that getting his narrative out actually helps rally the people around him. And so I think we just need to distinguish between the court of public opinion and the court of law. And from a legal perspective, what I would say is to also approach this search from a national security angle. If he was in possession of classified documents, those are by definition potentially harmful to our national security if they result in any kind of disclosure or leak or somebody gets their hands on them. So it's an ongoing national security threat. And in terms of the negotiation, it's, they've gone above and beyond in terms of trying to get these back. I mean, if I steal something, I'm really not in a position to negotiate keeping them. They shouldn't have been there. But I think at this point, they have no choice but to go retrieve them if he continues to hang on to them because of the threat that they pose. And just, what kind of secrets could these be? This could be defense information. It could be about our weapon systems or technology, the kinds of things that a president might have access to, names of agents who are abroad undercover. I mean, these are very serious things. And, any normal employee wouldn't be able to even go into a skiff with a cell phone because that's how sensitive these are. And apparently he had these in a room at Mar-A-Lago that wasn't even locked, and they had to ask him to put a padlock on it. So I think that we do need to emphasize how serious this is from the government's perspective.